What's going on, guys? Welcome to the show. Welcome to Wednesday afternoon, and welcome to a very special episode of the Popcorn Talk Network's Action Movie Anatomy. Today we are covering The Dark Knight, 2008's spectacular, is it even really a superhero movie? I mean, it involves a superhero, but feels a little more like a crime drama. This is one of my 5 favorite movies of all time. This is one of Andrew's 5 favorite movies of all time. We're going to break this whole thing for you down, guys. We'll see you in just 1 second.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk, we talk movies. And now, here's Popcorn Talk's Action Movie Anatomy.
Boom! I'm dyslexic. That was
I know,
break
I was like
this whole thing for you down, guys.
I was like, something's wrong.
Yeah, that's good. Welcome to the show, guys. Welcome to Wednesday. Welcome to Action Movie Anatomy on the
Yes.
Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network dedicated to talking movies and all things movie-related. Wow, what an episode today.
This is incredibly exciting.
It's incredibly exciting. So, guys, we're doing The Dark Knight today. We cover action movies on this show. The Dark Knight's an action movie. Those movies that we cover on this show adhere to 4 basic rules. Rule number 1, the hero is always someone who plays by their own rules. Batman, of course, does.
Yes.
The hero and the villain are always the smartest people, things, beings, dogs, aliens, whatever in the room, and I would say easily the Joker's brilliant.
He's brilliant.
He's tactically brilliant.
And he's doing it just because he wants to watch the world burn.
Yeah. Nobody in the movie has that accent.
No, I know. I didn't get it.
Was it Michael Caine you were trying to do?
I was like gonna not do one at all, and then I decided I wanted to do one, and I just got lost in the middle of it. Shit. Let's start over.
Rule number 3, the movie is driven by a police, military, political, or mercenary figure.
Jonas just said nice Caine impersonation. Ha!
That's a swing and a miss, not on the Michael Caine impersonation, though it was a swing and a miss. On Rule 3, Rule 3 is a miss because Batman is a billionaire, industrialist, philanthropist, inventor.
Yeah, he's not police, military, political, mercenary, doesn't work for them. Complete miss.
Actually, he's a genius, but he's not an inventor, really.
No.
That's Iron Man. And Iron Man, as I've said before, is the DC equivalent of Batman. He's the slightly less good version, who's an inventor and an alcoholic, as opposed to having his parents die.
Yeah.
But they're the same
is so
role in the
sweet.
2 universes.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I don't think there's really a way for us to argue that it meets Rule 3, but it definitely meets Rule 4, which is what this film contains the minimum of 1 explosion. There
Yes.
are many explosions.
A lot of
in this.
explosions in this movie. So, guys, if you want to follow along with the conversation, Andrew's over here in the live chat. You can follow along on Twitter. We are at AMA Podcast on Twitter. Share your thoughts. You guys have been very involved this last week or 2. I think a lot of people are very excited about this movie.
Yes.
And then, of course, if you want to follow us personally, you can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter and Instagram.
And you guys can find me at Andrew Ghai on Twitter and Instagram as well. And of course, here every Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm not having a stroke, by the way. I just was like kind of burping while talking there, but trying to hold the burp in while talking. Then the burp went away.
Look, see, this is a lot harder than you guys think it is.
So, guys, some context. We said from the very beginning that we were never going to do superhero movies on this show. There was things we talked about.
We did, and I always argued that if we were going to do any film, any movie in the superhero universe, this was probably this and The Punisher with Thomas Jane were probably the only 2 that we could get away with.
Well, I think, didn't you argue Batman Begins for a long time?
I did argue Batman Begins for a long time, but with the whole, like, the gas and all that stuff, it just, like, this film is, like you said, this is just kind of a crime drama with some great action in it.
It's basically just Heat with Batman.
Yeah, which, did you see...
the quotes? The opening sequence, how much it's referenced based on it?
And, like, you know, that Nolan made them watch Heat before the film and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's well documented that he's a massive fan of that movie, and that this movie it owes a lot to it. It feels, tonally, it has a lot of the same elements.
The city, the city is like, it feels like that gritty city that they give you in Heat.
Yeah. So the reason we decided to do this is because we recently made a list. It was a pretty long list of the movies that we were still interested in doing on the show. Obviously, when we started, we made a list of 40 or 50 movies that we thought kind of fit the bill. And as we've gone, the show's evolved. We've covered things we never thought we would cover. We've done less of those original run movies than we thought we would by now.
Yeah.
I think doing 80 episodes. This is episode 80.
Yeah, I mean, today is actually episode 80, and I think the fact that we just did True Lies last week is kind of a testament to the fact that we've done a lot less movies that we thought we were going to do originally.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think we just sort of looked at the list and we were like, you know what? Who knows how long we do Popcorn Talks Action Movie Anatomy? Like we maybe we'll do it till episode 200, but we have no idea. The point is, we knew that there were certain movies we had to cover at some point.
And if we didn't cover this...
Yeah, we never did Dark Knight because we had some arbitrary rule when it's one of both of our 5 favorite movies of all time, has tons of action, and we talk about it all the time on the show, then who are we really doing the show for?
It's our show.
We're doing the show for us. We don't care. No.
Yeah, no, we love... And we all know you guys love this movie. I mean, who doesn't love this movie? And as our audience, this movie is perfect for it. And I think one of my favorite things about this film is the trailer.
Absolutely.
When this trailer came out, I remember the very first trailer. You didn't see the Joker, right? You just heard his laugh at the very end.
Yes.
Like the teaser.
You're talking about the first one where he's like, where Bruce Wayne's in the bunker and he says the line about like they've taken it a step too far.
Yeah.
They've pushed things, and he's like, you hammered them without whatever. And
Exactly.
then that one. And it's like not that great of a teaser, but you were still excited, and then you hear the laugh at the end.
Then you hear the laugh, and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Like you got chills when you heard the laugh. And that was the first time you had heard or seen anything that Heath Ledger had done with the role other than some of the makeup, maybe. And
there might have been a picture, but I mean, this is 2008, so we were in early stages of like social media maelstrom, but it wasn't the same kind of thing.
And I remember hearing that, and that was that moment for everyone where it was like, oh my god, Heath Ledger can do this.
Yeah, the laugh sounded awesome. I mean, we'll talk a lot about Heath Ledger in this episode, but there's definitely remembering the era that we were in and the period in time in his career that we were in before this movie came out. I think there's definitely some revisionist history when people talk about Heath Ledger and who he was at that moment, when he was announced as the guy that they cast, and then what people expected before, of course, the trailer, and then when that trailer that we're about to watch dropped, and you saw him for the first time. I mean, let's just cue the trailer.
Yeah, let's do the trailer here, Marissa. Oh my god.
Oh, actually, this is. I'm gonna stop you here, Marissa, because this is actually trailer 1. So I shot you a link in that email with the details. This is the first trailer that always comes up, but it's actually trailer 2 for whatever reason. But it's this very specific one. We'll just keep talking about it for a second. Thank you so much, Marissa. Appreciate it. That's Marissa Serafini in the booth, by the way.
Serafini in the booth, dealing with us and our own organization.
Yeah, she's our producer and engineer today. Marissa, do you love this movie?
You know, I really do. I mean, I enjoy Christopher Nolan. He's a great director. I personally have issues with Christian Bale, but
Fair.
A lot of people do.
A lot of people do.
This is a very solid movie all throughout.
And your issues with Christian Bale don't actually come from his outburst during Terminator, correct? Or
Not just that one.
right.
Not just that one.
If you guys haven't seen that clip or heard that clip,
That's the one.
Yeah. All right. Let's do this first.
Thanks, Marissa.
You've changed things. Forever.
No going back.
There's no going back. See, to them,
Oh yeah,
you're
it
just
was
a freak.
this.
Like me.
Just that alone.
That could have been the end of the trailer.
Yeah.
You know.
I
But
watched
it gets better.
150 times easily.
Nothing. No name, no other alias. Clothing is custom. Nothing in his pockets but knives and lint.
Evening, Commissioner.
Oh god.
It's just like terrifying.
Yes.
Why so serious?
Like, this is one of the greatest trailers of all time.
This could be the greatest trailer of all time.
People are dying. What would you have me do?
Endure.
Endure.
You can be the outcast. You can make the choice that no one else will face. The right choice. Gotham needs you. A little fight in you. I like that.
And you're gonna love me.
Now that's more like it, Miss Wayne.
It's all part of the plan. Come on, help me.
So just ridiculously awesome.
Yeah.
Let's put a smile on that face.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Like I'd want to watch it like right now. Or actually, I just want to watch that trailer like 100 more times.
So when this trailer came out,
Endure. I'm gonna redeem myself.
Yeah.
By the end of this
that was
episode.
better. That was better. You're warmer. You're in orange zone now. I told you I used to have this roommate, and he was just as obsessed with it as I was. And I remember that trailer coming out, And this was in the days when it wasn't like we all had iPhones. We could just stream a trailer on our phone and watch it whenever we wanted. It was like you would have to watch it on like the iTunes store or something like that, or YouTube. And I remember the trailer coming out, and I downloaded the trailer onto like my iTunes on my computer. I like had the actual large 1.5 gig trailer on my computer.
Oh, you
so that I could, like,
okay.
So I could watch it in HD on my computer without an internet connection. Like, and I'd swear to God, I watched the trailer 150 times. Like,
Oh, easy.
yeah, like I could quote it. We probably both could just quote it like line for line.
Definitely. And I think that as far as trailers go, when we did our which episode was it when we did the trailer
Greatest trailers
countdown?
episode? It might have been like Crimson Tide. No, he just referenced Crimson Tide.
It was a newer one. Either way, there was an episode we did where we covered the greatest trailers of all time, and Interstellar was in there, and the Superman, Dawn of Steel was, or Man of
Oh, it was Star Trek. That's what it was.
Star Trek, right?
Star
Star
is a
Trek was in
fucking
there.
great
Yeah, it's
trailer.
amazing. And Dark Knight. Those are like 5 of the greatest trailers of all time.
Congo,
The Lost City of Zinj.
Snake Eyes.
All right, guys. So the first thing we're going to do after watching the trailer now is we're going to hop right into our thesis statement. And Ben, why don't you describe what thesis statement is?
Thesis statement is your big bold thought about the movie. So it's kind of your talking point. You're at a party. You're like, I know movies. Somebody brings up this movie that you like, and you're like, well, let me tell you about this movie. Let me tell you the thing that's going to start this conversation that somebody you want to kind of impress almost, and they're going to be like, oh my God, that's a great point. It's kind of your thing you stand on. So we like to come up with one of these. It's very bold, big, and strong. Should not be loose. It should be kind of almost like hyperbolic in some ways.
Yeah. And I actually want to hop in first with an audience. It's not their thesis statement, but it's a point that they're making, saying that this film is highly overrated. It's a very overrated film. And I don't like when people just say things like that. But I really do appreciate when they back it up with a reason.
Okay.
That's the whole point of a thesis statement. So you're always entitled to your own opinion, and if you think it's overrated, that's great. And what this is Future Trunks saying, he loved the movie, but then I became a hardcore comic book nerd and then saw Affleck as Batman, and he's his true Batman. And I have heard that a lot of people's biggest problem with this trilogy is Christian Bale as Batman.
So, just a quick piece of context here, guys. We have a jam-packed episode today with a lot to talk about, and I guarantee some of the common questions that come up about this movie, the final 40 minutes, Batman as Christian Bale, the importance of Ledger as Joker, we will cover all of them in various segments. We have some great AMA questions of the day at the end of the episode today. We'll probably talk about a few throughout the episode and then cover the last ones in the normal section. We do that, but we're doing more than one question today, and a lot of those questions do, in fact, reference some of the things people like to bring up. So it's a great point you ask. Is this movie overrated? Do you think it's overrated? We will have that discussion later.
Absolutely. Do you want to go your thesis first?
Yes, absolutely. So, I watched this movie yesterday, and it was, probably the 30th time I've seen it or something like that. It'd been a couple years, I think, since I'd watched it the whole way through.
Yeah, where you sit down and watch it beginning to end.
Yeah, this is a movie that came out in an era and a moment in both of our lives where we both had a lot of free time and energy to expend on watching movies and talking about movies. Yes. Not in a work capacity, just in
I was going to say, it's different. It's very different from now.
Yeah, you can just sort of be obsessed with something in a different way completely. So this movie also was sort of a zeitgeist film. Like, when it came out, it was a talking point for a solid 2 years for multiple reasons.
Yes.
Everything from the posthumous Oscar to the massive financial success of the film
to everyone dressing up as the Joker for Halloween, for his voice being the most recreated, distributed voice in the world.
Kind of launching Nolan as like the preeminent director of our time. There was a lot of things that happened with this movie, and so when you think about it and you watch it again now, looking back at everything that's happened since, you have to really separate everything that you experienced, all of the sort of the cultural shift towards superhero films in the last 8 years, and then really just the movie. And the thing that I realized when I watched this movie was that as great as this movie is, as much as I love this movie, here's my thesis.
Here it comes.
Never in history has a film's legacy owed so much to one specific performance than The Dark Knight.
Never has any film's
legacy owed as much to a performance by an actor than this film, ever in the history of movies.
Huh.
I'm going to say this movie's relevance, as crazy as this sounds, is tied over 90% to Heath Ledger as Joker. And I know that's crazy because this movie's fucking fantastic.
It's true, because I'm sitting here and I want to argue that immediately, because that's what I like to do with you, is argue with you. But it is a very valid point, and the first thing that popped in my head was Gladiator. And the reason that Gladiator popped in my head is because of all the research we did on it and all the stuff behind it, the writing and the problems that were going on set. But at the end of the day, Commodus is still one of the greatest villains ever, alongside Russell Crowe as one of the greatest heroes ever.
And the fact that Russell Crowe had a very significant career with a lot of very memorable films surrounding that.
Ridley Scott had already been known as one of the greatest action directors of our generation. So I think I agree. I think that's a really good thesis.
It's just like you can come up with so many great performances, and you can come up with so many great films that feature unbelievable roles.
There's always something else.
But this movie, really, when you think about it, and the reason
at the time, you guys got to remember, at the time that it came out, Nolan had only done 4 other films, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was following Memento. He had done Batman Begins. He had done Insomnia.
Okay, so yeah,
and and he had also done Prestige between Begins and this.
Right, it came out just before this. Yes.
So the reason I'll say that, and again, guys, the most obvious talking point of this episode is Heath Ledger is the Joker. I think everybody knows that.
Hopkins and the Edge.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah,
great shout out.
Charles Morse, fantastic. And I mean, again, like Hopkins and Silence of the Lambs, like there are roles that are unbelievable. That movie won Best Picture, for the record. Like the reason that I say that about this movie is that you think about anything else contextually about this movie and how it's aged and how people will remember this trilogy. We live in a time now where superhero movies come out by the half dozen a year. I mean, and they're good, and we get great ones all the time, and the effects are bigger, and the stunts are bigger, and the explosions are bigger. People love the hottest actors get the roles. Like, you're talking about an all-time performance by an actor who had shown once ever on the grandest scale that he could do something dramatic. He had gotten 1 Oscar nomination, and aside from that, was essentially an art house indie actor.
Yeah, not even though. He was an art house. He was a pretty boy trying to prove that he could be an art house indie actor, trying to prove that he could be a leading man for Oscar-winning movies.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing. I became obsessed with Heath Ledger after he died. I already was pretty obsessed with him once I learned that he was the Joker.
Yeah.
Because I was completely enraged at first.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck are you doing putting this pretty boy in? I know he can act.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I know he can act, but he's not the Joker.
Right.
Then I heard the first trailer and I heard the laugh.
Yep.
Then I was like, okay, that's a laugh. That's a laugh that has so much behind it that no normal actor could do that. I became obsessed with him and his career path. And guys, I think if you love this movie and you really respect Heath Ledger, just go read about the dude if you haven't already. He's cool. He's a really cool guy, and he didn't want to take his looks and ride that. He wanted to ride art and things that really mattered, which is why I mean, this is one of the greatest performances we've ever seen.
Yep.
Which is going to go right into my thesis that Heath Ledger dying was the greatest and the worst thing to happen to this trilogy and this film. And there's a lot of points behind this. I think I want to see how I can bring in this question as well. The first point is that this is the first time a comic book movie got a real, like, one of the premier Oscar nods. A supporting actor nod. It was the first time showing that these movies aren't just superhero comic book movies. These are real great movies.
People often reference this movie and WALL-E coming out the same year as the reason the Academy went from 5 to 10 nominations, because this movie didn't get a Best Picture nomination.
Both of them didn't get a Best Picture nod, and that's exactly why they expanded it. Also, I think that Heath Ledger dying hurt this franchise a lot because he was supposed to be in the next film. He was supposed to be in court, and that's when Harvey Dent was supposed to get introduced. So I'm going to jump ahead real quick to Octane Fetty's question. Would this movie have been better if it was shorter and without the Harvey Dent Two-Face transformation? Yeah.
Definitely.
It would have been, because it wasn't supposed to be in this movie. Heath Ledger dying, them having to do that and change it and make this whole... It's forced. It's forced into the film. Goyer's original copy of this film didn't have that in it. And Heath Ledger dying and the way that things changed made it so that this film had to have Two-Face as like a secondary thought.
As a fall guy for the third movie.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny because, again, you watch this movie and all you end up doing when we watch these movies is you appreciate what you appreciate and you look for holes because something you've loved and you're critically analyzing the movie. Mm-hmm. Never in my experience watching this movie had I felt as much as this time that the Two-Face and the Aaron Eckhart storyline, it really doesn't ruin it, but the final 40 minutes of this movie, I barely paid attention to it. I was zoned out. I'd seen it so many times, so it's not like I missed anything, but it's not compelling.
It's not compelling at all. The moment that the Joker says his last line is all it needs is a little push, and his laugh.
Yeah.
If the movie were to end there, or some like a quick tie up about Bruce
and the 30 minutes leading up to that, though, because all the Two-Face stuff, and even God love him. I love Aaron Eckhart, but like he's not very good as Two-Face.
He's not. And the best part about Two-Face is his scene with the Joker
Yeah.
in the hospital room.
Yeah.
That's it.
He barely talks.
Yeah, exactly. So I have more points on this. I don't want to just ramble on, but I do think that it is the greatest and worst thing to happen in this trilogy and also to comic book movies, because this is showing you that they can be cut from a different cloth. They can be Oscar-winning, Best Picture nominated, Best Picture winning films. And you can do it with $185 million. Civil War's budget is $1 billion between the two movies. It's $1 billion.
You mean not Civil War?
Or Infinity Wars.
Infinity
Excuse
Wars.
me.
Yeah.
It's $1 billion.
Yeah.
This movie is 185.
Yeah.
You know.
100%. So, guys, those are our thesis statements. Jump in if you want to share your big thoughts as well. There's a lot of big thoughts about this movie. Much has been discussed about it. So, if you have something you want to share and you want to back it up in the chat, feel free to do it. The question, again, by Octane Freddy, I appreciate you contributing that. And definitely my answer is that, yes, this movie would have been better without it. I don't know that that's an easy fix. I don't know. You can snap your fingers, and it's kind of like we reference Heat a lot. Heat is the diagram for this movie in a lot of ways.
Right.
Like people will often compare the two. And Heat's the same way. Heat's 25 minutes too long. What would I cut from Heat if I was going to make that movie shorter? I'm not sure. That's the issue. I've seen Heat the same number of times. It's also in my top 5. And it's hard to say. With this movie, if you cut the Two-Face stuff or you cut some of the stuff with the fairies, I mean, you have to replace it with something. There has to be a different way to wrap things up, and I'm not sure that there's an easy fix.
Yeah, I mean, we can sit here and say, oh, this isn't good, and we wish it was different, but it's still a phenomenal movie. It's one of the best movies ever made, and it doesn't do a huge disservice to the film, but the fact that the Joker is so good and then taken out for 40 minutes, that's the problem.
Right. Yeah, well, and let's move on to our next section of the show, because I think I have a sneaking suspicion that we're both going to reference something Joker-related here.
I'm sure we will.
Guys, this is called Fist Pump Moment, and if you have watched the show before or listened to the show before, you know this is that moment in the movie something happens, and you're just like, this is awesome! Oh my god, I get to watch the rest of this movie right now. You want to call your buddy and be like, hey, you got to turn this on. Go to this point. It's just incredible. And this movie has a ton of them, so it can be anything. It can be the title music, can be a certain line, a look by a character, the music, anything. So let's get into Fist Pump Moment. Do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I think it's when they're out there and he's like, what one man can do, another can do. Okay, so my whole fist pump is a scene, essentially. Because there's so much in there. There's like my favorite line in there. It's all combined.
It's got to be the same as mine.
It's when he meets the gangsters.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, so mine is when he meets the gangsters. The first time you see him, every line of dialogue he has is fantastic. My favorite line, I'm not going to say yet, but my fist pump is, you want to see a magic trick. When I was in theaters and he like sticks the thing in the table and he's like doing his thing, you're just like, what is going to happen?
Yeah.
And the guy walks over and he's like, it's gone.
Yeah, gone.
I just looked over at my roommate. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That was fucking amazing. And it's so subtle and so smart.
Yeah.
And like so brutal.
Yeah.
That it was just like, oh my God. This is everything I wanted.
It's funny because you rarely would use the phrase delighted when describing yourself watching a movie. Like, it's such a strange, but like, elation. Like, watching the movie, I had the same experience. I remember that happening. And then I remember like the next day recounting it like it was a date with a girl that was like that I like was in love, just like head over heels for it.
Like, oh my God. And then
recounting each scene, each time Joker was on screen, each thing, talking about it with my buddy. Oh, and that fucking guy, by the way, that my buddy that used, his mom owned a movie theater, and he didn't want to like tell me. He saw it 2 weeks before it came out.
Oh my gosh.
And he kept pretending like he hadn't seen it to not ruin it for me. And then I finally told him, he was like, yeah, I saw it 2 weeks ago. I was like, you son of a bitch!
Can't do that. Oh my gosh, yeah. So that moment, I remember specifically the next day being like, I just had this stupid grin on my face all day. So that is, if I had to pick one fist pump moment, there's so many, that is my single fist pump.
Yeah, my fist pump moment, okay, so it's a combination of two things. Hans Zimmer does this incredible thing with his score. It's a great score, but the sound that he created for Joker, for his scenes, is one of my favorite things I've ever heard sonically in any movie. It's like, it's so fitting to a character, and it's also the first sound you hear when this movie opens. It's and I think, I seem to remember reading about this at one point, but it's like piano wire, like being like a quarter or a coin or something being like slowly against piano wire.
Yeah.
And it creates this high pitched like squeak. And it's like, it's just eerie and kind of frightening and like dark. And so that when that starts playing in the interrogation scene with Batman, and it's like midway through when he realizes that he has Rachel and Harvey, and he smashes his head against the fucking glass.
Yeah.
That's like, that whole sequence is my fist pump. That whole interrogation, the smash. It's just when he's laughing as he keeps hitting him, all your strength and all your training. It's just like, it gives it. That's a real fist pump. It's like, yes, this is so cool.
And what's so great about that scene too is you watch Batman get brought down to his level.
Yeah.
You see the man, the Dark Knight, break down and lose his cool. That is awesome. What's great about that scene too is Heath Ledger was like, just do it.
Yeah.
Do all of it.
Yeah.
Don't hold back. Hit me as hard as you can.
Yeah.
I want it to be real. And he did, which is, and you saw,
Yeah.
it was real. It looked very
Does he
real.
really smash his head against the glass?
He does all of it.
But the glass must have been rigged in some way.
Oh, all of, yeah, of
Yeah.
course. They're never going to have real glass in that stuff.
Yeah.
'Cause, you know,
Yeah, right.
bleeding, cutting.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so those are our 2 fist pumps, guys. If you have any, you can feel free to throw them in the chat, and I'll shout them out. What should we move on to?
Let's
Where
move
these
into
guys
star
are at?
profiles.
Okay.
Yeah, where these guys are at in their careers when this movie came out. So this is a very interesting place to go. So we never got to see, obviously, what happened after this movie with Ledger, but with Bale, so he had been in The Prestige in 06, which is really, really, really fun. That's a great movie.
Can't believe I saw it for the first time this year.
Prestige?
Yeah.
Really?
I really had never watched it. The Illusionist and The Prestige, I missed both of them. I watched The Illusionist like 2 years ago, and I just watched The Prestige this year.
Did you not tell me you saw it this year because we had talked about it so many times?
I felt like I told you that I didn't see it. I think what I'd said is I think I had seen it, but I wasn't sure.
Right.
Like I'd watched it in college with my
Yeah.
buddies, but then I went and watched it from beginning to end, and I was like, no, I hadn't seen this.
It's so good.
It's really good.
It's probably my second favorite Nolan movie behind Dark Knight.
And Nolan's casting is just fantastic.
Well, because I always reference the one Hugh Jackman scream when he's reading the novel on the train and he gets to the point and it like cuts off. And he's like, no,
yeah, no.
yeah, it's amazing. So The Prestige was 06. 310 to Yuma is 07. I'm Not There is 07. Have you seen I'm Not There?
What's that? I've seen it. Yeah, it was when I was working at Blockbuster. It came
Yeah.
out. I don't really remember it all.
The Bob
cool,
Dylan
though.
movie. Yeah, it's a pretty badass movie. It's got this whole crazy, interesting cast, and it's like Bob Dylan through the ages, played by
different actors.
Yeah, like they take the cover of one of his albums, and they take the characters that are on the cover of that album, and Ledger plays one of those characters. It's a pretty interesting movie. It's got a really crazy cast.
Well,
like,
so does Bale, right?
yeah, Bale's in it, and Kate Blanchett plays Bob Dylan at one point.
I remember that. I always thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So that's what Christian Bale was doing. But this movie came out, and I believe, unless I'm mistaken, Terminator Salvation's also 2008. I think it's like 2008 or 2009.
Yeah.
It's like we're right in here. It was like the peak oversaturation Bale era.
Yeah, I think Terminator was kind of that. Terminator was the definition of like, this is too much now.
Because 310's good, and he was like really, he was like doing very cool things. And then like, Batman came out, obviously, and he had the biggest summer of anybody.
Right.
And then the next couple years, it was like the next Batman movie, also Terminator, and there's like at least something else.
And you could we referenced the Terminator freak out earlier. You could just probably hear the dude's overworked. He was doing too much. He was like the Sam Worthington effect was taking place over someone who didn't need to do it. He'd been famous for 20 years already.
Yeah, and so he's kind of now he's sort of rebounded back into super incredible actor with like ton, because he won the Oscar for The Fighter a few years later. So that's sort of Bale, and the freak out we're talking about, guys, for those of you that don't remember, on set for Terminator Salvation, one of his lighting guys like walked through the back of a scene or something like that, and he flipped out, and somebody recorded the audio.
Yeah.
And he screams at the guy for like a solid 5 to 10 minutes. And it's just gross. It's like totally, it's not so gross that you're like, I've never gotten pissed about something that I care about. It's like one of those things, like if you've ever been on a sports team and like tensions are heated and you guys start yelling at each other, like it's kind of like that, except it's very disrespectful because you're the multi-million-dollar superstar,
Exactly.
and the other guy's running lights.
Whereas that kind of thing happens on set all day between the lighting designer and like one of the guys setting the lights. Like that's the kind of shit that happens when you're working your ass off on a film that is supposed to be one of the biggest films of all time. Terminator did not end up being that, but I get it. I understand the dude, and I think we all understand. Even though, like you said, it's gross, shit happens.
Yeah, it's definitely overboard. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah,
and it was very
absolutely.
bad for him. I mean, that went viral and in a bad way.
Oh, real quick, we got a couple fist pumps. We got the ambient music that plays when Joker tilts his head after shooting the guy in the bank.
Yeah.
Like when he shoots him, he just kind of looks at him. And then we've got the burning the pile of cash is awesome.
It's an awesome one, yeah.
I love his throw when he hits
Yeah.
Lau in the face.
Yeah.
Is like such a perfect throw.
Yeah.
The hospital walk off dressed up as the nurse with
Awesome.
the bomb
Yep.
that didn't initially go off. And then they said he can list more, but they're done. Okay, so anyway, back to where we were.
So that's Bale, right? Now, if you switch over to Ledger, this is what we were saying, and I was just before we turned the cameras on, I was kind of going into this, but Heath Ledger, first and most notably, had some stuff go on in Australia. He was like a big, like he was like a soap star in Australia, I think. And then he came over to the States. 10 Things I Hate About You is one of the early ones.
Yes.
Then his role in The Patriot is well noted. People love that role. And
We
then
got A Knight's Tale.
A Knight's Tale, and then he's got the role in Monsters Ball, which I think is
Yes.
2001, and he plays like the hated son, like, you know, alcoholic father or whatever. And I think he commits suicide in the movie, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I believe so.
I haven't seen it since it was out. But then there's a string of movies that happened between 2001 and 2006. Everything from like Ned Kelly, I believe he's in. Like, he's in a bunch of smaller stuff, and he's kind of going about trying to make his name as a dramatic guy, trying to lose that pretty boy image. And he was definitely showing up, and people were noticing. And then, of course, Brokeback Mountain in 2006 is the big breakout. Ang Lee's movie about two closeted cowboys that have this like long-running love affair. And for those of you that haven't seen it or have some prejudice against it because of the subject matter, amazing
Watch
movie.
it. Yeah, a lot of time has passed since that movie's come out.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I love that movie, and both Gyllenhaal and Ledger are great. They both turn in great performances. He gets, obviously, the more complex character, which is why he gets the Oscar nod for that movie. I don't believe Gyllenhaal got one. I think it was just Ledger.
I think it was as well.
And I also think was 06 like that weird year where Crash won the Best Picture, but Ang Lee won Best Director for Brokeback?
I believe so.
I think that's what happened,
That
right?
sounds correct. Yeah, because I know Crash won.
It was like definitely one of those weird years where like that almost never happens, the picture director split. But Ledger is phenomenal, and his role as Ines Del Mar is this very quiet, kind of Bale-esque performance in some ways. It's like a very Christian Bale thing to do, be super quiet and mumbly.
Yeah, I mean,
and-
he's just got so much inner turmoil just brewing inside of him the whole film. You can always feel it when you see him. Like, even just the way he talks.
Yeah.
It's like a guy that can't speak comfortably.
Yeah, he kind of mumbles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you just leave me be?
Yeah, that scene when they first come off the mountain and he goes into that tunnel and Jack drives away and he like starts like fucking, I think he's like hitting the wall or maybe he's
Yeah.
hitting himself. He's freaking out. Like, it's just a fucking great movie. Anyway, point is, that was the big thing in 06, and people noticed, but of course, because of the subject matter, that's not going to get the kind of widespread worldwide attention that The Dark Knight would get. So when he was announced then as Joker, it was kind of like, the only thing we really have is this quiet, closeted cowboy.
Right.
And then a bunch of art
Pretty
house
boy.
movies.
Yeah.
And Pretty Boy movies.
And they originally met with him during filmings of Batman Begins, Bale and Nolan, and were like, no, you are not the guy. You're not even close to what
He
we
didn't
want.
think he didn't think he was either.
He didn't think he was either.
Yeah.
No, and then what happened was when they, well, we'll get into that with production, but basically what the end of that long story is, it came back to it. Other people had tried it out. People were terrified to be the Joker.
Right.
Because it's so
of
much
Jack.
weight. Because of Jack, because he did such a great job. And Nolan's final response when people asked why he did it was because he's fearless.
Right.
And you see in this role that he was clearly fearless in making those bold choices.
Yeah, he took on so much and did such a crazy job with it. But we were talking about do you remember where you were when he died? And it's funny because somebody like when Robin Williams died, even like James Gandolfini, for instance.
Yeah.
Gandolfini, who had been Tony Soprano, had been this incredible role for like 7 years or something. I remember Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
David Bowie, Prince, all these. I remember each of these. It's weird because I remember Ledger dying. I know exactly where I was. But at the time when it happened, I paused for like 2 minutes and then went back to what I was doing. Because if you really think about it, at that moment, he was a guy that we all knew was going to be Joker. He had one role people had paid attention to. And aside from that, it was like, he was this kind of like, I don't know what this guy is.
He was up and coming. He was like Ryan Gosling, like
5
when
years
The Notebook
ago.
came out. Like that's who he was.
Yeah,
he was
I
a
guess
guy
that's
that had done something that caught a bunch of attention, but we didn't really give him a chance yet.
I'm trying to think. Gosling, 04. It would probably be more like a couple years later, right? Like maybe like right before Half Nelson or right around Half Nelson.
Well, I think Half Nelson is the Brokeback.
That's what I'm saying. So maybe it would have been like him dying after getting the nomination for Half Nelson.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Something like that. And like I said, I became obsessed with him. So when I was sitting there, I'd waken up and I think I took my dog on a walk and I came and I got in my computer and I sat down and it was the first thing I saw, and I think it was Facebook. And I just sat there, and I couldn't believe it. And I remember I just was like, Google everything, news, everything I could read about it to see if it was true or if he was actually dead, if there was any way that he. And I just sat there for like 2 hours, just like researching.
It was crazy. And what's wild is that as much as that was like a moment, and then the next day people were like, "Wow, well, I can't believe the movie. What did he finish the scenes?" They guaranteed that he had shot all of his scenes. A year later, when he's winning all the Oscars posthumously, he became this figure in a way nobody ever could have imagined that he would have at the time he died. It was just not on our radar that this was going to be
as great as it was.
And as iconic. It was iconic for so many reasons.
This might be the most iconic role I'll ever see in film in my life that came out and was made when I was alive.
Yeah, maybe.
You know what I mean? Like, the other roles that they talk about that really stick with you is like Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, but I didn't watch that in theaters.
Right.
You know, like there's a few other roles out there. You know, Javier Bardem in No Country is amazing, but it's not in the same way.
And it's because that's what that was with my thesis. Why? It's because of the prominence of the franchise and of the characters and of the companies, and now the storm of superhero movies that have happened since. It's just this exists in a whole different space than it ever could have when they were developing in 07.
And that's part of my thesis as well, saying that this is also it hurts other superhero movies, because I'll be honest, man, my thesis was going to be that this is the greatest superhero film ever made and ever will be made.
But it's just too obvious and too on the nose, right?
It's too obvious and too on the nose.
Thought, yeah.
But at the same time, these superhero movies are good. They're getting better.
Yeah.
I just don't think you can ever have one this good ever again. Like, even I think Wolverine is an attempt to have one that's like serious and dark and real, but there's no way. It's not directed by Nolan and written by him.
We'll definitely circle back to that one a little later.
Yeah.
But let's continue to move into production development and the people behind this movie. So you mentioned this earlier, but this is really cool. In the first 4 days of scheduled shooting, they didn't actually roll any film.
Right.
Nolan actually screened 8 movies for the cast and crew over 4 days.
Yeah,
right?
2 movies a day, and that was your job for the first 4 days of filming.
So it was Heat, Cat People, Citizen Caine, the original King Kong, Batman Begins, Black Sunday, Clockwork Orange, and Stalag 17. And unless I'm mistaken, we wrote down the last time we covered Nolan, I believe it's here, his 10 favorite movies in that list. I thought Stalag 17 maybe was one of his favorite movies of all time. Anything by Stanley Kubrick, so Clockwork Orange is in there. But yeah, I guess I don't see Stalag 17. I thought maybe that was one of them. But yeah, I think that's such a cool approach, you know. And like we said, Heat's one of the movies that he makes everybody watch. So
yeah, I love that, because when you have someone that's that visionary, that knows exactly what they want, you know, the Camerons, the Spielbergs, the Nolans of the world, this is how he wants to start his production. He's got the biggest stars in the world on the biggest film in the world, and he's like, we're going to take 4 days and we're going to watch movies. That's
right.
it. Because it's important. And as you can see, it helped. It worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I want to show really quickly before let's just dive into all the people that made it when we're still close to Ledger is this crazy interview. This kind of surfaced a couple years ago, and it's an interview with Tom Waits from 1979. And it's young Tom Waits. And when you hear the voice, you'll understand why we're bringing it up. It's hard to imagine that he didn't draw a lot of his inspiration for the character from this interview.
Let's go ahead and cue it up.
I got here last night. I was on a plane from Paris for about 22 hours. It was a fascinating flight. And
what do you do for 22 hours on a flight? You have ways of entertaining yourself?
well, they show movies that are not a big success anywhere else. They put them on the planes.
You want these? This is what you're looking for?
Thank you.
All right, we can
can
cut
it.
it. Thanks, Marissa.
If you've never seen that before, it's uncanny.
Yeah.
It is impossible to deny inspiration from that interview.
And those on audio, I can't imagine what you just experienced, because not even seeing it, but just listening to it. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So I don't know. There's a lot of legend that's associated with this role, and I'm sure we'll continue to touch on it some more. But
while we're in star profiles real quick, can we just talk about Gary Oldman? Just for a second, because Ben and I have I think you were maybe the first person to ever say this to me. Gary Oldman is the greatest Gordon of all time, and he's one of the best parts of the entire trilogy.
Well, what I've often said, because there's not so many Gordons to pay attention to, that I think it would be so hard to even, what I've often said is that I think he's the most accurate representation of a comic book character in the franchise. He feels and looks and sounds and acts the way you would just assume Gordon.
The look is great.
Did. I mean, if anybody here is listening has ever read Batman Year One, which is like maybe my favorite Batman comic, or even possibly my favorite comic book of all time, it's just dead on. I mean, it's just exactly what you imagine he would sound like.
And there's nothing better than watching someone who you know is one of the greatest actors of all time, and his specialty is being a fucking psycho. That is what Gary Oldman is known for, is losing it better than anyone else.
Yeah.
To play such a grounded, level-headed, almost like bumbling character sometimes is just brilliant.
I'll tell a quick story here. I've told it on the cast before, but it's been a little while, and it's specifically relevant now. There was an interview that Aaron Eckhart did on the Chris Hardwick Nerdist podcast that I listened to, I remember, a couple years ago, and he's recalling his experience working on this film. And he's being asked about working around Heath and just sort of watching him work, and he's like, I'm so lucky to be on set. He had done Thank You for Smoking a couple years earlier, so he was kind of on people's radar, but compared to obviously Oldman, he was different class of actor at that time. And he's like, I'm just sort of standing around watching everybody work, and I'm watching Gary Oldman, who's one of the great actors of all time, and I'm watching him as he watches Heath Ledger work. And he's like, and the look on Oldman's face and the kind of appreciation that I could see coming from him as he watched was uncanny. And he was like, and that's really where you knew you were watching something that was transcendent.
Sir Michael Caine had never met Heath Ledger before in his life.
Yeah.
And during the party scene, the fundraiser was the first time he ever met him. Sir Michael Caine forgot his lines because he was so terrified of Heath Ledger playing the Joker.
Yeah.
That is how good he was.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to production.
Yeah. This is good. So in the casting for this film, Katie Holmes was offered the part.
God.
She was offered the part. I always thought that she had that they didn't want her back.
It was she turned it down because of Scientology, right?
I'm not sure about that, but I know that instead she opted to co-star with Diane Keaton and Queen Latifah in Mad Money that year instead.
I remember seeing that box as well when I was working at Blockbuster. Probably the biggest misstep in someone's career. This is worse than Will Smith turning down Neo in The Matrix.
Yeah.
Because Will Smith still has a fine career. Katie Holmes is no one anymore.
Yeah, she did Mad Money.
So
this movie is written by Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan, and David S. Goyer.
Yep.
So Christopher Nolan, we've talked about at length. We'll talk about him in a minute a bit more with direction. His brother, Jonathan Nolan, has really done a great job here over the last 5 to 6 years, developing his own brand and becoming his own person. Like, for a long time, it was like Christopher Nolan and his brother, who he works with.
His brother helps him write. Where
it's like now, Jonathan Nolan co-created Person of Interest, a show that ran for 5 years. He is a co-creator of Westworld, the show that's like just everywhere right now that everybody loves.
Huge.
He's co-written.
Have you watched it?
Westworld?
Yeah. I can't wait. It has two of our favorite people in the world in it.
Yeah, it's saved now, so now I can go watch the whole thing.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, I mean, he is a co-writer. Memento is based on a short story that he wrote, so that's pretty cool. And then, he co-wrote...
Which, if you guys haven't seen Memento, that is one of the greatest movies and, like, mindfucks you'll ever see.
He co-wrote The Prestige, Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises, and Interstellar. So that's pretty badass. He's definitely done some pretty big-time stuff. He's a writer on this, Christopher Nolan, and David S. Goyer. Now, David S. Goyer, guys, is a pretty big name for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
He, going all the way back to the late 80s. He graduated from USC. This is a great piece of trivia. He graduated from USC in '88, sold his first screenplay for Death Warrant.
Death Warrant.
Which is a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie.
Death Warrant.
And then with his first paycheck, he bought a brand new Isuzu Trooper, which was stolen the very first night he drove it home. The fact that he did it off of a check from a Jean-Claude movie makes the whole thing just like it's like comedy out of a cartoon or something.
And it's in Isuzu.
Yeah, it's incredible, the whole thing. I couldn't believe that when I read it. But he ended up being involved in the whole entire Blade trilogy as a screenwriter, the whole Dark Knight trilogy.
Dark City, which is known as like a major cult classic.
Yeah, exactly. Man of Steel. Dark City. He's a novelist. He's a comic book writer. He's written the story for Call of Duty Black Ops as well as the sequel. He's
a badass.
Yeah, he's super, super, super involved in the comic book world, and now he's developing more things, and he is totally firmly in place as one of these comic book adaptation specialists.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things reading about him was when he saw his name come up at the end of Dark Knight, and he was like, I can't believe that my name is on a movie that good.
Yeah.
And he's written other good movies,
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
like
Blade Trinity.
like Blade Trinity, one of my favorites, Dark City. So moving on.
Dark City, the trailer. Do you remember seeing the trailer for that movie as a little kid?
Freaked me out.
Scared the shit out of me.
Shit out of me.
I was like creeped out by it. I got really scared. I watched it this morning again. To see if it's still pretty scary.
Still creepy. It's just such a weird movie.
Yeah. I've never seen it. I've never
Really?
watched it. No.
It's too scary for you.
I just never wanted to. I would, but I just haven't.
I would. I'd be fine. All right. So should we talk about Chris a little bit more? Like, you know, like his starting at I can't even remember the name of the school in London.
What we can say about Christopher Nolan is that at this point he is quite arguably the biggest working director in the world. I mean, you can talk about the other biggest names like the James Camerons of the world.
The Inarritus now.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, when you talk about getting a budget, making a film profitable, and doing it with an original idea, Interstellar is kind of the proof that, like, Chris Nolan can sort of just do what he wants and it'll make money.
Yeah, and he can do things. He can portray things that you didn't know you could understand, and he did that in Interstellar with bringing in like that fourth dimension and like that time travel world, blah blah blah. And then he did it in Interstellar with Inception with just bending the rules of reality. So I think he's the most innovative director of our generation.
There was a conversation for a long time about Nolan versus Fincher, and I think Fincher has done some pretty incredible stuff.
Me too.
He's definitely a well-respected director, but I think, you know what I think it is I don't think it never became which is better. Neither one ever won. It just became they did different kinds of movies.
Yeah, and I guess for me, Nolan hasn't done a bad film yet for me.
Okay, I think Insomnia is pretty bad. It's pretty like...
Yeah, I mean, I like Insomnia.
Yeah.
But he hasn't done anything to where I'm just like, I don't know if this is going to be good or not. Whereas when I see a Nolan movie, I'm like, I can't wait to see it. You know, our buddy Matt, who was on Air Force One, our very first episode ever, he's worked with Nolan. He says he's one of the coolest guys to work for. Like, not that he's an asshole. He knows what he wants. And it better be perfect. He shows up early. He's on set. He works with only a single unit. And when he was doing Dunkirk with him, he's just like, yeah, the dude's a genius.
Yeah.
There's no way around it.
So cool. Yeah, I can't wait to watch Dunkirk.
Same.
So he worked on Insomnia at the recommendation of Steven Soderbergh. From there, he turned down working on Troy.
Good job.
Yeah, I mean, he's just done a lot of stuff. He's huge. He's made tons and tons and tons and tons of money.
He continues to work with, you know, Wally Pfister, who's one of the greatest cinematographers of all time, who also he got an Oscar nod for this film as well for cinematography.
Yeah, the cinematography in this movie is amazing. That scene when he jumps off the building is just like, it's unreal.
There's so much amazing. Just the semi truck flipping,
so cool.
It's just so crazy.
Yeah. So then moving on from there, as we said, Dunkirk is the World War II film that he's working on now. That will be the next film. The producers on this film, Emma Thomas, who is his wife.
Yep.
They met in college.
Oh, there it is. University College of London. That was my bad.
Yeah, they met in college. They've worked together for a long time, and she's been the producer on most of his movies and continues to, in fact, all of his movies. Oh, I guess she's credited on every single one.
Yeah.
And then Charles Roven's a very, very successful producer. He is the founder and president of Atlas Entertainment. His all the way back to like the early 90s, late 80s, 12 Monkeys, Three Kings, Johnny Handsome, a bunch of movies that, and in different genres too, that people would recognize. But the big breakthrough for him is that Batman Begins, he did a great job with. He was then attached to all of the other films in this franchise, and now is an attached producer for every single DC Comics movie. that's been made.
You're set, brother.
Yeah, but there was a big controversy because of his overarching role with after Batman vs Superman kind of bombed against expectation a little bit, and it seems like his role has changed a little. There was a lot of articles written about this at the time. Nothing was confirmed then, but he's still involved and he's still credited as a producer on IMDb, but it seems like he's not as involved as he was. So,
Got it. Yeah, BVS was tough. That's a really tough one. Real quick with the audience, I love Blade 2. It is my favorite Blade in the trilogy. I know Blade 1's sweet because people started talking about when we were talking about Blade. Blade is the best vampire movie ever. I like Blade 2 more. I like Blade 2 more as well.
I like Blade 1 the best.
Blade 2 is better, but Blade is my favorite. Anyway, so I think we could maybe cover Blade one day, but that's not a conversation for right now.
We could definitely do Blade.
All right, moving on past production. Cool.
I just wanted to let everybody know that Charles Roven has made over $3 billion in adjusted domestic box office.
That's a perfect segue into our next, because this was the first comic book movie to ever make $1 billion. This movie was released by Warner Brothers in July of 2008. I saw it at midnight. I'm pretty sure you did as well. Yep. It cost $185 million to make. It grossed domestically $533 million in its original run, and it had a re-release in 2012 where it made an additional $1.5 million. And I honestly think that was just so that it could make $1 billion. Because
Probably.
it was right under $1 billion.
That's funny.
Worldwide, 469 for a grand total of $1.005 billion.
Which used to be impressive.
It used to be. Yeah, it was one of 4 movies to ever make $1 billion at the time. This movie, opening weekend, it made $158 million, which is the 10th highest of all time. And like I said earlier, it was the first comic book movie to ever make $1 billion. It made as much it made as much money as Batman Begins did in 5 days. That's insane.
So we've talked about this a couple times, but let's just touch on it really quickly. So Batman Begins in 2005 came out. Now, in 2005, we were both 17 years old.
We were just about to graduate high school, yes, next year.
And I saw it in theaters with my dad and my brother, and I remember thinking, a new Batman movie, but not like a new Batman movie. I've been waiting for this, like, since the last Batman movie had come out, we had turned into, like, almost, like, going into adulthood. Like, we were, like, late teens. And when the previous one had come out, we were 10 years old. So this was kind of like, oh, I'm a grown-up to some degree now, and I appreciate things that are good quality, but there's a Batman movie.
Yeah.
I guess we should see it. I remember walking out of it thinking, like, oh, it was a pretty good movie. Like, that was cool. And I wasn't keyed into what was going on in Hollywood like I am now. So I didn't realize there was a trilogy planned and that they wanted to do 3 movies. And in retrospect, watching that movie, it's much better than I gave it credit for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people argue that Batman Begins is the best movie in the whole trilogy.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people that I think feels it's a more important film. I don't know if it's better or not. It's hard with Ledger and watching the whole thing again. But what I will say is, I think I walked out of that, and I don't remember perfectly, but I'm pretty sure I walked out just being like, yes, thank God, Batman's back. He's been my favorite superhero since I was a kid.
Yeah.
This is sweet, and it's kind of dark and badass, but who's this guy? Who's Ra's al Ghul? Where's a villain? Where's a real villain? I didn't read the comics, as no one really... Reading comics back then was nerdy, and it wasn't popular like it is now, and that's not why I didn't do it. I just wasn't a comic book kid. You know?
Let's face it, you were a high school athlete. That's exactly the reason you didn't.
I was a theater nerd who played football and played video games professionally, okay? I was pretty nerdy, but I didn't read comics, and so I was, like, kind of bummed. That there wasn't, like, the Joker, the Riddler, Two-Face, Iceman, Mr. Freeze.
Iceman, huh?
Iceman.
Get out! Get out!
The guy that shoots cold out of his gun.
The guy that shoots cold out of his gun.
Okay, so moving on to critical reception. This movie has a 9.0 on IMDb. It is number 4 all time. This is interesting to me because when Dark Knight came out, it was immediately number 1.
Yeah.
And it stayed at number 1 for a while, and then Shawshank and Godfather passed it. And now it's down to number 4, and it's been almost a decade. Me and my friends, when we saw it, we were like, it'll drop. It'll drop way down. It'll drop down into the 20s, maybe 30s to 50s. It hasn't dropped.
Right.
And the votes keep going up. This will be known as one of the greatest movies of all time.
I think you can definitely say it's one of the greatest movies of all time. I mean, one thing that people don't talk about often is that when you go back to those lists, those like greatest all-time lists, and in fact, Marissa, if we can actually throw this up here just while we talk for reference, I pulled the top 10 highest-grossing superhero movies of all time domestically. It's an interesting statistic. This is number 2, I believe, behind the Avengers. But when people talk about the greatest films of all time, I mean, like the AFI top 100s, they're all important and they all have relevance, and some are newer than others. But it's not like they're all flawless.
Oh, gotcha.
They're not all flawless movies. They're not perfect movies. They're great for one reason or another. This is not a perfect movie. Far from it. It just happens to be so relevant, so important, and for so many reasons, and have this performance that pushes it over the top, which is, I think, why it should be remembered. It's funny. It's like Inception's a great movie, but I would still argue on a list of all-time movies, this is significantly ahead because
Definitely.
Inception's a great movie. I think Inception's maybe a better movie. This is a far more relevant movie.
Yeah, and it sits with you. It has more gravity to it. Like, when you watch Inception, it's sweet and it's fun.
Yeah.
When you watch this movie, it actually makes you think and feel things. And, like, the things that Joker says and, like, so many of the lines in this movie are so great.
Yeah.
And I mean, that speech about... First of all, of course, Alfred is traveling through Burma working with his friends, because, of course, that's what Alfred does. But even just that little story... The amount of detail and like what that story says, the writing in this is perfect.
Yeah.
You know?
It's great.
That being said, with what you're saying about how this is a flawed movie, Shawshank, for instance, and The Godfather Part 2, it's pretty hard to argue that there's flaws in those movies.
True. Yep. Yeah, I mean, look, we have had the conversation. We don't need to have it again.
No.
IMDb Top 250 is a silly list. It's not reflective of what the all-time greatest movies are. It doesn't take into account a lot of things. There's no way this is the 4th best movie ever made worldwide. That's an absurd thing to say.
No, but if you have a film in the top 50 or the top 100, it's a fantastic.
It's well
film.
loved, is the
Yes.
point. So it's reviews here: 94% by all critics, 92% by top critics, and 94% by audience. So all 92 or higher. That's crazy.
Yes.
9.0 on IMDb, which begs the question. I mean, this movie was nominated for 8 Oscars, including cinematography, and it won Best Supporting Actor in Sound Editing. Let's play a little game.
We got to do it. We have to do it.
Underrated, overrated, properly rated on the Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises trilogy.
Yes. Completely
Overrated,
standalone from everything.
Underrated, properly rated.
I'm going to hop in immediately and say it's underrated.
Fuck, I was going to say the same
Were
thing.
you?
Yes.
Okay, now I want you to go first because I want to hear why.
Underrated, and here's why I say so. Every year that passes, Batman Begins and Dark Knight Rises, they age in people's minds as irrelevant movies that they're not going to go back and watch. There's a lot of complaints about Christian Bale's performances in these movies. They don't like the Batman voice. Dark Knight, even today, on an episode from 2 guys that are obsessed with this movie, I'm sitting here poking holes in the movie and talking about how it's 40 minutes too long. There's a lot of things about this movie I don't like. I'm saying that most of the success of this movie is attributed to Heath Ledger, which I do believe.
Yep.
However, these movies were made in a time and over a period of time, a different era. If X-Men 1, the first Marvel successful superhero movie, ushered in Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, the Fantastic Four movies, the whole first run, you go back and you watch those movies. X2, for instance, was regarded as the best comic book movie for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a good movie. X-Men's not very good. X-Men 3 is terrible.
Yes.
Spider-Man's okay. Spider-Man 2 is pretty good. Spider-Man 3 is horrible. Fantastic Fours are unwatchable. Daredevil's unwatchable. Like, a different era of movies. If X2 was the cream of the crop during that time, all that happened in the next era was that the stakes were elevated, right? This movie came out, Batman Begins, and this trilogy happened in a time when we didn't get a half dozen superhero movies a year. Guardians of the Galaxy is the kind of movie that can get a Best Picture nomination easily at the Oscars now. I mean, that's a thing that happens.
Yeah.
We have tons and tons of these movies. There's an entire sea of DC movies coming out over the next 5 years. There's so many, and people are willing to treat them seriously, that the ones that come out now, take Civil War, for instance, a movie that was very celebrated as being a great superhero
It was a
movie.
really good superhero movie.
Like, really well done.
Do you understand, or do you guys hear that, though, when Ben and I say that? It was a really great superhero movie. Yeah. There's that has to be thrown in there.
Yeah.
Because it's not a great movie.
So all that happens over time, there's a "what have you done for me lately" idea with when people rate pieces of media, things that they love, and it's just a familiarity thing. Younger audiences come in, they watch the newer things, they talk to older audiences. If you're not somebody who's crazy and goes back and watches things all the time, all you have to remember are those conversations at the bar, that when you're at dinner and your brother's wife says, "I just saw such and such," and that's the conversation starter. people don't go back and watch movies like this. So what I think is that this trilogy, the longer that passes since, it's going to go down as less important than it should. It will be remembered less fondly than it should. And it will just be his performance really that sticks out. When I actually think when you envision a trilogy, and you concept the whole thing from start to finish, all three movies are so much better than they'll ever get credit for. Even Dark Knight Rises.
Especially Dark Knight Rises. That is my point. That is like the main point of me even making this underrated stance, making that argument, is because, look, Batman Begins, I think, is underrated, and Dark Knight Rises is underrated because of how good The Dark Knight is.
Yeah.
Look, the performance by the Joker transcends all three films. I get that. But when Dark Knight Rises came out, everybody was talking like this.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Love it.
For like 2 years, people were talking like this. Dark Knight came out 8 years ago, and it's still one of those movies when people talk about it, it's like, oh my God, that movie, they talk about it like it came out a couple years ago.
Yeah.
This is going to go down as the greatest superhero trilogy ever made for the reasons of incredible acting and directing and writing. The casting is perfect, and even though Heath Ledger wasn't around for the third film, which who knows what it would have been like.
Yeah.
It would have been incredible. Tom Hardy did a fantastic job as Bane.
So
he
good.
took it, he owned it. He literally acts with just his eyes the whole film. You never see someone's... How many times you never see someone's mouth move in a film?
Yeah.
And be able to feel everything just through their eyes, So I think that this trilogy is underrated because everyone just thinks The Dark Knight Rises is the best thing about it, and that's the only thing that'll be remembered. Whereas
The Dark Knight, you mean?
Or yes, I'm sorry. The Dark Knight that's the only thing that'll be remembered. Whereas Batman Begins, in my mind, is the best comic book movie ever made.
That's crazy. But
and I argue that against Dark Knight because of the importance and the relevance and, like, again, what you're talking about what it did when Batman Begins came out. That was like, okay, I can't make a superhero movie unless it's at least that good.
Right. This will cue a question from Eben, which is at @E_dog_95. The question here is, would we have gotten the darker DC universe that we see today if we had never gotten The Dark Knight? The obvious answer to that question is no.
Yeah.
You may have gotten successful films in the DCU, but you wouldn't get the dark version of the universe because, look, let's be honest, Christopher Nolan's a producer on Man of Steel. He was a producer on Batman vs. Superman, and it's his voice that's involved in making that universe.
Yep.
I just wish that he was directing all the movies instead of Zack Snyder.
Exactly. And also, when this movie came out and how dark it was, it's the same thing as when Deadpool came out and people didn't think they weren't sure if it was going to hit or not, and then they saw it and the audiences received it like overwhelmingly positive. It, of course, would have never been as dark because people would have been too scared to do it.
Yeah, people try to, go darker, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
There's a difference between trying to be dark and it just being dark.
Right. 100%. So let's move on to the last bits of the show. Okay. Let's move on to our next game here, which is going to be Favorite Line. This one's pretty self-explanatory. If you guys are fans of the show, you know all about Favorite Line. So I'm going to jump in, and I think I'm going to defy the odds here because my favorite line's not a Joker line.
Is it Caine?
What?
Is it Caine?
No, it's actually... I remember as I was watching this time...
I know what it is.
As I was watching this time, I was noticing the initial interaction between when Aaron Eckhart first meets Gordon, and he walks into the office, and he's like, I hear you've got a hell of a right cross, and they start talking, and he's like, I like their whole... It's just a tight interaction. He says, like...
I love that Eckhart doesn't even look at him for the first 30 seconds.
And he's like, Gordon, I don't like that you have your own unit. And I don't like that it's filled with cops. I investigated when I was in internal affairs. And then Gordon says something, and he's like, I don't get political points for being an idealist. I do have to do the best with what I have. That's my favorite line.
That's
because
a good line.
It's just such a Gordon line. It's such a fucking, like, he gets his role. He's the cop. He's not commissioner. He's just trying to do the best with what he has, and he knows the city's broken, and it's just great. I don't know. It's just that interaction's so quick and so tight. And the first time I watched it, I remember almost like I wished in the theater I could have rewound it because it's so quick.
Yeah, it's true. That line is overlooked a lot, but I remember hearing it now that you say it. Gordon is the true White Knight of Gotham.
Yeah, he is. He's the best.
I mean, some men just want to watch the world burn. Yeah. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
That whole speech is just so cool because it. What I love is that when they wrote this film and they talked about it in the production notes is that they didn't want to waste time on the Joker's backstory. They wanted him to be an absolute.
Right.
And that story is all you need for a backstory. So much is said in that. I love that. But my favorite line in the whole film comes from that same opening scene with the mobsters. And it's when Spawn
Yeah.
says, or what's his real name? Michael Jai
Oh, Michael J. White.
White. Yeah, when he goes, "You crazy."
Yeah.
You know, and he's like, that moment
Yeah.
of Heath Ledger being like, I'm not.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
the seriousness of it in that moment of like, you can do a lot of things, but you cannot call him crazy because he's
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
crazy person. Like that, when he said that line and when I watched it yesterday, I rewound it.
Yeah.
I've seen it 100 times. I rewound it and I was just like, wow.
He's got all these. I mean, there's so much we could talk about with his performance, but like the incredible intonation of his voice that he does, where he does the high thing when he goes to the low register, it's fucking terrifying.
It's creepy. Like, look at me.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. Like, you can see it in that actor's eyes because the actor didn't know what was going to happen in
Yeah.
that scene. Heath Ledger filmed that on his own with him and directed it. But like, he's terrified when he yells that at him.
Yeah.
It's really scary, man.
Yeah, it's awesome. So last thing we move on here before we get into the last bit of the show, Josh Ryan Sports asks, do you think this movie deserved a Best Picture nomination? He does. I think we have answered that with the way that we've talked about it today.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
What won in 2008? Or for 2008?
No Country, I think.
Wow. That sounds right.
So either 07 was No Country and 08 was Hurt Locker. That might have been it.
Yeah, I mean, if it's against either of those movies, honestly, it deserves a nomination. I don't think it beats either of them.
Yeah.
I love No Country, and I love The Hurt Locker.
This is why I'm saying when I say like the number 4 on IMDb thing, I'm just like, it's not even in like the top 30 probably.
Yeah, because
you're
neither of
gonna-
those two films are above it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's when you start getting into that rankings list, it's like this movie's
It's
good
dangerous.
and it's relevant, but it's relevant for a reason, and I don't think it pushes it.
The amount of hours you and I have debated that list is hilarious.
Yeah, it's fun.
We got one more quick fun question from Andrew Mullen at MT Graps on Twitter. It says, favorite piece of tech in the movie?
It's actually MTG Raps. He's a Magic the Gathering fan.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
MTG.
MTG Reps. His name is MT Graps. I was like, is this a Raps? I was going to go with the Magic the Gathering, but then I saw Raps and I went with that.
Yeah.
Shit.
Favorite piece of tech? Do you have a favorite piece of tech in the movie?
Yeah, it's the bat cycle.
Or the wheel spin?
The wheel thing, it's when it comes out of the tumbler. I was just like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
I think it's got to be the like explosive gun that he uses on top of the building. Or,
The little sticky things.
Yeah, that thing, or the squirrel suit that he flies with.
Yeah, the plane thing
Yeah.
is really sweet.
Both of those are sick. That scene's outrageous. Like when you watch it again, it's still a jaw dropper for me.
It's masterful.
It's just jaw dropping. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, what the fuck? Like that's.
And the best part of it is the cop being like
Yeah.
the head cop, just like, well, I don't know what
Yeah.
to do. Like, what am I supposed to do? All right, moving on past that. That's all of our questions for the week, guys. Thank you so much for submitting all those. We can tell you were very excited about the episode, as were we.
Yeah, we missed a handful, and I'm sorry, guys. We will absolutely try to make sure to get you on the next one.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for the ones we did. It's been a lot of fun to do the AMA question of the week. It's been a nice addition to the show. So next, we will get into the 3 categories. And again, recently, I feel like this has been pretty easy for us.
Yeah.
There are 3 action movie categories: totally ridiculous, totally legitimate, and ridiculously legitimate. Movies like Face Off and Con Air are totally ridiculous. Movies like The Fugitive and Lone Survivor are totally legitimate.
I like that.
Yeah.
New pull.
Yeah, and then movies in the middle category are sort of like our favorite ones, which are like The Rock and Point Break and Predator. And for me, without a doubt, this movie is totally legitimate. Though I guess there could be an argument for the middle category if you were
Just because of the end?
yeah, and if you
or-
were turned off by a lot of like the superhero-y kind of stuff, I could
And
see
like
that.
Yeah. Rachel!
Yeah.
You know, things like that. I agree, though. I still think it's totally legit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. So, guys, we are going to move on to the next category, and this is going to be something called The Pitch. So, guys, like we said, we have this list of movies that we put together, and we've been kind of changing it up in the last few weeks. Some weeks we've been doing the thing where we ask people if you guys want to see X movie or Y movie. Sometimes we just pitch a movie, and I think this week we're going to open it up to a poll.
Okay.
So we're gonna post on the Twitter. Go follow us at AMA Podcast. We'll put up a poll for you guys to vote on next week's movie. 2 awesome movies will come up, and if you want to decide on the movie we're gonna do next week, Go to that Twitter in the next 48 hours and vote on it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you want to follow along with either one of us, you can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter and Instagram.
And you guys can find me at Andrew Ghai at those same 2 locations.
And a big thank you to Marissa Serafini for engineering and producing this episode. Thank you, Marissa.
You're welcome, gentlemen.
We'll see you guys next week.
Take care.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.